Welcome to your essential business briefing. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up, a global shortage of truck drivers hits supplies of everyday goods. We'll speak to one transport group about the situation across Europe. As Spain prepares to increase its minimum wage, we're asking if it'll help to ease the pain of a recent spike in inflation. Plus, the sales of wine recovered from this summer's floods in Germany skyrocket as buyers snap up the bottles saved from the deluge. First to one of the biggest challenges facing businesses at the moment, a shortage of key materials. The global lack of semiconductor microchips was a big topic of discussion for car makers at the motor show in Munich. But it's also become more difficult and expensive to source things like wood and metal, which is impacting the construction sector. Add to that difficulties with shipping products by sea or road, and some consumers are seeing gaps on the shelves too. A global shortage of truck drivers is one of the major factors in this. It's a problem particularly in the United Kingdom at the moment, where many drivers are EU nationals. But what's the situation across the rest of Europe? Let's speak now to Raluca Marian from the IRU, an organisation representing the road transport sector. Raluca, thank you for being with us. Can you give us an idea, what is the situation in the European Union? Are there particular countries that are suffering more from shortages of drivers?
Driver shortage has been an issue in the EU for many years. Now with the corona, because the decrease in demand in some segments of the market, we were hopeful that this has been somehow improved. But unfortunately, recently we have run a survey, and we could see that the driver shortage is still a very, very important and increasing problem in the EU. Talking about countries particularly affected, and probably that's also logical, one of them is Ireland. And that's, of course, the effect and the neighbourhood with the United Kingdom.
And what exactly does that mean then in countries like Ireland? If there's a particular shortage of truck drivers, who's being worst affected by that?
Sometimes, as you could see in the UK, because you mentioned the UK, you could see it on the shelves. Other times, there is not an immediate observation by the general public, let's say, but it's a factor which in time will be noticed. But of course, the most dramatic and immediate impact when there is this kind of especially if the shortage is all of a sudden, is of course the lack of products on the shelves and what is directly perceived by the consumer.
This isn't a new problem, as you said. It's been an issue of shortages for a long time. Why are we short of truck drivers?
Well, there are several factors for that. In the EU, I would like to list three of them. One of them is the restrictions and high costs of entering the profession. Another one would be the image of the profession, which is also very strictly connected with the conditions or working conditions for drivers.
So how do you address long-running issues like those?
Of course, we address them by looking at the causes and trying to address the causes and not only patching it here and there. As IRU, we have done also we have run a number of projects in order to address that. If we start with the conditions for drivers, we are talking about conditions like, for example, lack of parkings or safe and secure parkings. The press was full of attacks on drivers, especially in France in the recent months, but also simply the lack of parkings. Then there are also conditions like at the delivery place. So let's say not a nice treatment that drivers receive at loading and downloading places, and even the treatment by enforcers at the roadside checks. So as IRU, what we have done, for example, we co-signed with the unions on the EU level and with the Shippers Council. We have signed a charter for the treatment of drivers at the loading and downloading places. And then we brought this even at the international level and co-signed with the unions at the international level. And we also invited all corporates, shippers and transport operators to become partners to this charter and acknowledge the issue and try to solve it together.
Is money a major factor here? Is it just that we need to accept that we're going to have to pay more for goods because shipping goods is going to cost more money and because drivers need to be better paid? Is that the logic that you would follow?
I'm not so sure that it's about payment. When I talked about the image of the profession and the conditions or working conditions for drivers, we don't have any specific evidence that simply their remuneration would be the immediate factor for being, let's say, not happy to embrace this profession or stay in this profession. I think the image of the profession, the conditions, the way they are treated, you've seen during the pandemic, the fact that they were the heroes of the pandemic, and paradoxically, they didn't have even access to the basic facilities on the motorways. So that gave a lot of publicity to the drivers, but did it help to the image of the profession? Would it cause a lot of drivers of potential drivers and young people especially to embrace this profession? So there are a lot of, we shouldn't underestimate any of this. And as I said, there is a pool of factors which contribute to the issue.
Should we be looking at trying to move some transport away from road to rail or, is there an alternative there to relieve pressure by taking long distance transport off the roads and onto other forms of transport? Definitely,
we should look at all options. And trying to create alternatives for road is something that the European Union, especially, and many countries, I guess, in other regions as well, they've been trying for years. But first of all, it seems that this is not an easy path. It doesn't happen so quickly. And in addition, even the European Union is forecasting a very, very important increase in demand. So creating additional rail or inland waterways, additional ways to transport and increasing the capacity is needed and will help, but will not solve the issue.
OK, Raluca Marian from the IRE, thank you very much for joining us. Spain's Prime Minister has announced plans to increase the country's minimum wage. The government says the change can happen now because the economic and employment situation there is improving. The increase comes after inflation in Spain hit a 9-year high in August, with consumer prices rising by 3.3%. Kate Moody joins us with more on this. Kate, how does Spain's minimum wage then compare with the rest of Europe?
Well, Stephen, 21 of the EU's 27 member states currently have a minimum wage. Bulgaria has the lowest, just €332 per month. Luxembourg is the highest at 2,200. Germany only established a minimum wage in 2015. It's currently around €1,600 per month. France is around 1,500. France's minimum wage has increased just over 1% over the past decade. Wages have grown more rapidly in Eastern European countries over that period. The bloc is currently debating a minimum wage directive, which would require member states to impose a fair working wage.
Is raising the minimum wage a good way to combat the effects of inflation?
To a certain degree, yes. The main concern with high inflation is that the cost of living can outstrip wage growth and make life too expensive for workers. The International Labour Organization suggests that countries should adjust their minimum wages either at fixed, regular intervals, once a year, for example, to give workers some predictability, or when the cost of living changes dramatically. That's the scenario facing many countries at the moment. Inflation, or the pace of price rises, is accelerating. The EU's 3% inflation rate in August was the highest in a decade.
Are there risks involved in raising wages like this?
There are, yes. Raising minimum wages can increase consumers' spending power, and that's a good thing. But a more generalized jump in pay can also push up prices still further, leading to a sort of spiral which is considered bad or too much inflation. Some employers warn that higher wages mean they can afford to hire fewer people, so it can affect overall employment or hours. On the other hand, higher wages can make it easier to attract new workers in a period when job openings are on the rise.
OK, Kate Moody, thank you very much for that. Now, when severe flooding hit parts of Germany in July, the wine growers of the Ahr Valley were among those who suffered massive damage. Cellars were submerged and in some cases barrels and machinery swept away. When the floodwater subsided, many producers decided to sell their mud-caked bottles as they were, as a way of marking this difficult period. Peter O'Brien has the story.
All seemed lost. Cellars were soaked, vats ruined, and hundreds of thousands of bottles caked in mud. But for the Flood Wine Initiative, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. On its website, it's proudly flogging the bottles as they were found, with the kind of photography usually reserved for deluxe vintages. The wine, mostly Pinot Noir, is being sold for up to 3 times the usual price to support the affected wine growers. And the campaign's been a huge success, amassing around €4.5 million already.
This
wave of support is more than anyone expected. We thought it would be great to get €1 million, maybe €500,000.
It's enough to lift the spirits of some of the Ahr Valley wine growers hit by July's devastating floods. Peter Krischel lost hundreds of hectares of vines engulfed by mud.
More than half the population here depends on wine growing. But we won't be beaten. The floods were strong, but we are stronger.
There's another glimmer of hope. The plots higher up on the hillside weren't affected, and they're showing signs of a strong harvest. Despite the numerous aid campaigns and a national reconstruction project which is costing the German government billions of euros, some think the valley will never be the same. Wine growers need to access such funds urgently to restore their machinery and rebuild their businesses. If they can't, some may have to abandon the region.
That's it from us for now, but you can watch back all of our previous shows on the France 24 website. Plus, we're on social media if you want to get in touch with your comments and questions. Until next time, thanks for watching.